Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Micheline Maynard to celebrate the launch of Satisfaction Guaranteed. She'll be speaking with Congresswoman Demi Dingell tonight. Just a quick webinar overview for our attendees. The chat is closed, but you can keep the chat window open as I will be sharing links to purchase the book from Literati throughout the event. Q&A is available to you as well. We encourage you to submit questions at any time. I'll read a selection of your questions at the conclusion of the conversation this evening, and live transcription is available should you need it on your toolbar. If you are watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books in the description directly below me. You can also like and subscribe to our videos to be kept up to date for when they become available on our channel at a later date. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or the Ann Arbor area, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. Most of all, we'd just like to thank you for your attendance this evening, or this morning, or this afternoon, depending on when and where in the world you may be joining us. So without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's author and our moderator. Micheline Maynard is a journalist, author, and professor. She's a contributing columnist at the Washington Post, where her essays on business and culture appear in Voices Across America. She has been a senior editor at NPR's Here and Now, and was a senior correspondent and Detroit bureau chief for the New York Times. She also writes for The Takeout, Medium, and the Ann Arbor Observer. She's the author of 4 books, most notably The End of Detroit, How the Big Three Lost Their Grip on the American Car Market. She lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Joining her this evening in conversation is Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan's 12th District. So please join me in welcoming into your living rooms, Mickey Maynard and Congresswoman Debbie Dingell.
Thank you, John. So I can't get used to calling our guest Micheline because I've known her for a very long time, for decades, as Mickey Maynard. Mm-hmm. And she and I were talking at the Ann Arbor's Farmer Market, where you will find me every Saturday, about the book she was writing. I've known Mickey because I worked for the auto industry for decades, and she wrote about the auto industry for decades. And I always did business with her. I always talked about cars, and I still love cars. And I think she still loves cars. But she told me she was writing this book about my favorite place, a place that I've got good friends who found it, and it's always got me comfort food. So I was excited to be here having a chat with her tonight. So Mickey, it's great to be with you. And maybe you can start by telling everybody, why'd you write this book? How did you go out of your comfort zone, except it's not? Why did you write it?
Over the last few years, I had been writing more and more about food. I'm very interested in the culinary world, as much about the business of the culinary world as actual food itself. I started around 2017, I started to move a little bit away from pure automotive and write more about the restaurant world, the food world, trends in food. And around Thanksgiving of 2019, I was looking at an email account that I don't check very often. And I had an email from a literary agent named Irene Goodman. And she explained that she had 2 degrees. She was from Oakland County. She had 2 degrees from Michigan. And she used Zingerman's mail order all the time for corporate gifts. And she had been looking to sign up authors to write business books. She was looking at a story I wrote about Zingerman's in 2007 for the New York Times when it celebrated its 25th anniversary, and thought that I might be the perfect person to write a story about Zingerman's. At the time, the book she had in mind was basically the history of Zingerman's, founded by Paul Saginaw and Ari Weinswag in 1982, something about the food, something about the management philosophy, which is taught to a lot of people. And then what would the future of Zingerman's be? And we figured out that 2022 would be its 40th anniversary, which is a huge accomplishment for any food business, because 4 out of 5 food businesses are gone in the first 10 years. Almost nobody makes it to 40. Unless it's a family business, and this isn't a family business. So we figured, let's have a meeting. And we scheduled the meeting on March 15th, 2020 with Ari. Ari came to the meeting and said, "This is the worst day of my life. I had to lay off 300 people because Governor Whitmer had imposed the first stay-at-home order." So from a book about Zingerman's background and philosophy and food, it also became a book about how Zingerman survived the pandemic, which put a whole different spin on the original book I was going to write. But I think it's made it a richer book and a more layered book than, if everything had been fine for the last couple of years.
So I agree with you on that. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But let me ask you a question right up front. Did Zingerman have anything to do with this book other than interviews? They didn't pay you to write this book.
Oh, no. So the book is the way most books go. You have an agent, you write a book proposal, and it goes out to different publishers. Scribner's was interested in it right away. My editor is a woman named Kara Watson. Kara Watson is the executor of the Hemingway estate. My late aunt, who just passed away, her father was the chauffeur for the Hemingway family up in Petoskey when they would come up to Walloon Lake. So when I heard that Kara was in charge of watching over the Hemingway literary properties, I thought, I want to work with this woman. And she wanted to work with me. So that all worked out fine. But no, Zingerman's did not pay me to write this book. In fact, I've probably spent tens of thousands of dollars, like a lot of people at Zingerman's over the last, couple of decades.
You can put me in that category. I can't decide whether to start at the beginning, which when I read the book, Zingerman's philosophy is, it's a culture that many have learned from. They teach people, they're kind of like, well, you write about it in the book, in your preface about Toyota, when Toyota had this culture. The restaurants do, but maybe I'll go to I found the end of the book interesting because I lived it, quite frankly, a lot.
Yeah.
Ari and I have been talking almost a lot, at least once a week since the pandemic began. Walk us through Zingerman's journey of reinventing during the pandemic.
So as people may know, Zingerman's is a community of businesses, they call it. So there's a dozen or so individual businesses. People know the Deli, but there's also the bakehouse, there's the coffee company, there's creamery, there's Zing Train, which actually trains people in the management philosophy. And all of these businesses are run by managing partners. And the way it's set up, the managing partners have basically the decision-making for all of the businesses. But it has been kind of both a cooperative and an individual process. And over the years, different types of people have suggested different types of things and have been told, well, let's look into that. So I wouldn't say it was a slow moving company, but it wasn't a company that innovated very quickly. And overnight, when shutdown happened in March and April of 2020, all the businesses were told, go find ways to essentially stay open. They were all given empowered to innovate, to do things that they felt would help their businesses the most. A place that might take a year to make a decision was making a decision in a month or two. And it was really something to see. In fact, I was in the bakehouse and I noticed some parts, metal parts over against the wall. And I said, what is that? And I was told that they'd had a separate oven for baking bagels. And they could no longer devote an oven just to bagels because there was so much demand for different types of bread. Remember, everybody wanted bread during the pandemic, that they had to literally dismantle the bagel oven and set the bagels aside for a while because it would have made more sense for them to sell something for $6 or $7 a loaf than one bagel for $1.25. I mean, happily, the bagels are back, but they were making important decisions like that that might have taken months to make in a different time. And I think that that's part of what saved the company. The interesting thing about the Deli, for example, is that before the pandemic, only about 8% of its business was delivery or carry out, most people went and stood in that big long line and got their sandwiches. They might call ahead, but they had to go pick them up. And now it's over 80% of their business is called in ahead or delivery. So that's a good example. I mean, there were loaves of bread that were no longer made for a while, and then they came back. There were sandwiches at the deli. If you go to the deli now, the deli menu is smaller than it was 3 years ago. And that was a particular decision, that if we're only using, roast beef on one sandwich, we can't make a 5-pound roast beef every day, because we'll be giving the rest of it away. So business by business by business all had to innovate and change.
So because we were talking about how the book changed, I went to the big end, which was about the pandemic. But maybe not everybody listening to us tonight knows Zingerman's as well as you and I do. I don't even know why I know them as well as I do. I'm like Barack Obama, which you talk about in the book. I like the Reuben. That's what I've always gotten there. But talk about the beginning. Talk about Ari and Paul a little, and their beginnings.
So growing up here, I remember a restaurant called Maud's, which is where there's now a Ruth Chris Steakhouse next to the parking garage. And Maud's was actually as part of the Main Street restaurant group, which is also the Real Seafood Company. Maud's was okay. I mean, Maud's, our parents would go and eat there and they'd take us along, and we didn't complain too much because it seemed kind of contemporary. It seemed okay. Like we'd even choose to eat there. And Paul Saginaw, who's a graduate of the University of Michigan, was a manager there. And one day, a guy named Ari Weinsflag, who was a Russian studies major, walked in looking for a job. And Paul was kind of used to these people coming in from campus and not having a lot of food background. And so I think he hired him as a dishwasher. And then he had aptitude, and he started suggesting different things for the menu. So he got promoted, and Paul was figuring, I'll probably move up in the Main Street Ventures group, and, maybe I'll run my own restaurant. And he and Ari started talking about what they really wanted to do. And they discovered that they both loved traditional Jewish food. They loved the big sandwiches with the Russian dressing that would drip down your arms. They loved knishes. They loved holiday foods. And, they looked around Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor didn't have a deli like the New York City delis or Manny's in Chicago. We had the Blue Front, and you could go and get bagels at the Blue Front. And there were a couple places around town that had different kinds of things like gefilte fish in a jar, whatever. But if you wanted really good Jewish food, you made it yourself, or you went to Detroit for it. And they decided Ann Arbor had a Jewish community and could support a real Jewish deli. And that was kind of the dream. I mean, they sat down at a typewriter and wrote out a business plan, and it seemed fine. And then they both had other things to do. I mean, Ari went out to San Francisco for a while, came back. Paul was working, on his restaurant career. And finally, in 1982, a place opened up at the corner of Detroit Street that had been kind of a deli, but it was sort of a half-hearted deli. And the building became available. And Paul said, here's our opportunity to open that deli. Then they had to come up with money. And they went to the banks, and the banks wouldn't lend to them. And then one bank would, and they were charging, I think, 20% interest, because this is 82 when interest rates and inflation were high. So Paul was able to get a second mortgage on his house. And then Ari got some money from his grandmother, and they put their money together and they opened Zingerman's Deli on March 15th, 1982. That's how that started.
So there's two kind of questions I want to ask about them, because I love both of these men and they are good friends. I'm the first to admit it. And have been incredibly good to me during the pandemic, because the pandemic started right after John died. And actually, I had to read the book to be reminded that they got an honorary degree the same year that John Dingell got his honorary degree, and we're on stage together.
And I think Robin Wright was part of that group, because Mrs. Wright was a friend of my mother's. So
So it was, I was reminded, I remembered, but I was reminded by the book. But the two of them balance each other out. They each have different strengths. Why don't you talk about that first? Then I want to talk about their philosophy and what they talked about at that graduation. But let's start with their strengths.
So if you look at the cover of the book, I'm not sure if it might be too blurry to see on here, but there are two people standing in the doorway of the illustration of Zingerman's Deli, and the tall one is Ari and the shorter one is Paul. And, as a business journalist, I think I feel a little more, just a little kinship with Paul, because Paul's very interested in management concepts. He's very interested in process flow. He's interested in the Toyota production system. We were talking about something one day, and I said, that sounds like something I learned in business school. And he said, yeah, it's from this guy, W. Edwards Deming. And of course, the light bulb goes off, and he's the guy that went to Japan after World War II, and they say he taught the Japanese how to build cars. I think what he learned when he went to Japan was the focus on quality, and he brought it back to the United States. But Paul was interested in that. And then Ari, as a Russian studies major, he's an intellectual. I don't think he's ever read a book under 900 pages. I mean, I'm joking, but Ari definitely looks at the greater good, at the philosophy, at the history of things that happen. And so you have one person that has kind of the pragmatism and one person that has the philosophy, but then the two have melded together to create the way that Zingerman's does business.
So now fast forward, and I remembered this when I read the book. I do remember this, but I had forgotten it, to be perfectly frank. And by the way, they were so good that nothing John Dingell said could compare to the two of them. But I don't mean that in any kind of disrespectful way, friends, either. But they talk about what Ari said to people and their list of what he told the students. But again, that balance. Talk about what they bring, their spirit of life to people.
Well, first of all, there's a great respect for the people who work at Zingerman's. I mean, I remember in the auto industry early on, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people working in the auto industry. And inside the car companies, they would call them socials, as in social security numbers. They weren't individual people, they were socials, they were employees. And I don't think anyone at Zingerman's is held in that light. Ari or Paul knows everybody's name. They know the family histories of the people that work there. They take people aside and ask them, what are your ambitions? How are you doing today? I remember what you told me the other day. Let's talk some more about that. I mean, it's a culture, I would say, of encouragement, that if you have something that you want to try, that you're allowed to suggest that idea. And I give an example in the book of the juicer at the Roadhouse. And one of the things that people do at Zingerman's is when they want to replace a piece of equipment, they kind of have to make a mini business case for replacing the equipment, for spending the money. Is this going to be cost effective? Is it going to improve the quality of what we've been serving? How long will it take to make the change? Is it easy for people to understand, or will they have to be taught how to use it? And they proposed replacing the juicer, and one of the reasons was that you could make more juice for lemonade or limeade with a new juicer than they were able to produce with the old juicer. And they make really good lemonade and limeade at the Roadhouse. So I think it was worth the investment. But that's, it's over and over and over again. The reason that there are breakfast and lunch specials at the Roadhouse is that one of the servers said, I'm working breakfast business, but I don't feel like I'm getting enough people coming in. Maybe if we had a special every day, that would draw some more people in. And she was allowed or encouraged to sit down and plot the whole thing out, bring in the cooks, bring in the chef, figure out the price point. And now there are specials, I think, from Sunday through Thursday at the Roadhouse. And they're a little bit less expensive than some of the dishes, but they make it up in volume.
I want to, you are right about their caring about their employees. I probably shouldn't say this, but I am going to say this. Ari's not only been a leader for Zingerman's through the pandemic, but both Ari and Paul, but Ari in particular has helped restaurants across the country during the pandemic. They have a weekly group, and I've talked to them. That's really why we talk more now than we ever have.
Yeah.
And there were days he was actually in tears when his employees had to be laid off. His employees were having issues, and it hit me so hard because in the book you also talked about his commencement speech and what he told the students that day as they look forward in their life. And I'll let you talk about that.
I mean, that commencement speech, actually NPR did a list of the best commencement speeches ever. And they chose the Zingermans, the Ari and Paul commencement speech at the University of Michigan. And I would highly recommend that people not only go and read the transcript, but also listen to them giving the speech, because they kind of trade off parts of the speech. And, you know, one of the things that Ari talked about was don't have a life where you are just trying to accumulate things. Have a life with a particular purpose. Figure out something that you can do well and figure out how it can help people. And then try to do that with your life. And another thing that they both talked about was joy in your life, and that it's very important not to just have goals for, I want to have a big house, I want to have a 60-inch TV set, but to actually experience joy. I mean, you might have the big house, but then natural gas prices have gone way up this winter, and you might hate the big house, you know, but try to find things that spark joy in your life. And this is way before Marie Kondo, you know, saying, hold it in your hand. And I think that really spoke to me, because, you know, my family's had a couple of losses in the last 6 weeks or so. And, you know, Debbie, I know that you've suffered after losing John. And I think it makes us think about what's really important and what are the things that we really, really want to spend time on and what just doesn't matter anymore. And so that, I think that commencement speech really summed up a lot about both Ari and Paul and the way that Zingerman's approaches life.
Do you think that aspect of community, those attitudes they have towards people, the caring, the compassion, the joy, is what helped them survive during the pandemic?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, I think there was the sense that I got was that, I mean, first of all, this is a pretty important company to Ann Arbor, to Washtenaw County, to the Detroit area. And that's a lot of jobs. And there's a lot of people that work. This is a $70 million business. This is the size of an automotive supplier, essentially. And I was trying to explain to people that you think it's only the deli. It's not only the deli. There's a whole chunk of Zingerman's that's down by the Ann Arbor airport. The mail order on one side of that traffic circle, and then the Zingerman South Side businesses on the other. And then Zingerman's products are sold in Plum Market, and they're sold in the airport. And you see the candy bars, and you see the bread and the cookies and the brownies everywhere. And so that isn't just people in one building making sandwiches. That's a whole enterprise. And I think because the philosophy is consistent, and because the way the customer service approach is consistent, things are taught to everybody. And so everybody buys in. I mean, if Zingerman's is not for you, you probably know pretty quickly when you go to work there, but then people go to work there and they get used to the way they do things, and they're just not happy working anywhere else. They leave and come back. I mean, some people leave and then start their own businesses and use the Zingerman's philosophy in their business, adapted to where they are. I mean, Rick Bayless, that people probably know him from Chicago. He's a University of Michigan alumni. He says that Zingerman's approach to customer service is the most valuable to him because the people he hires, they've never heard of a knish, they've never heard of matzo ball soup, but he wants them to tell stories to the customers. He wants the customers to feel welcome, and he's picked that up from Zingerman's. So in answer to your question about the pandemic, I think because the values are broadly shared, because the way of doing business was broadly shared, I think there were a lot of people that said, we've got to save this. We've got to keep going and do it in the Zingerman's way and make sure that there's something left, when this is all over with. And I don't think they needed to worry that much, but we didn't know that when we were at the beginning of the pandemic. And it looks to me like they made a lot of the right decisions. But you don't know that until, it's like taking a plane flight. You don't know when the turbulence is going to end, and then it ends and you're like, what was I worried about?
So it's easy to talk about Ari and Paul because they were the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But as you talked about a little at the beginning, it's not just those two. It's a collection of businesses.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those other businesses and the personalities and those guys too?
Yeah,
sure. I mean, Rick for me at the Deli is somebody that I saw every week, as well as Ari, but great. There are a lot. So why don't you talk about the businesses and the other people who are what make it strong? So
what's so interesting to me is that, originally I think the idea was that you'd maybe have one person as a managing partner. And what's really starting to evolve with some of the businesses is they're having 2 and 3 people that are managing partners of these businesses. So they're becoming a little more collectives than they are individual owners. And so at the Deli, you have Roger, who really doesn't like to go out in public, but he's back, running the kitchen. You have Grace, who runs grocery. You have Rick, that's kind of the front man, I think. And Rick actually has a background in other types of food businesses. And so he brings a little bit of an outside perspective to that. And then at the bakehouse, for years and years and years, you had Amy and Frank, as they were known as Frank and Amy. Frank recently, I think, retired a year or so ago, and Amy is partner at the bakehouse, but her son, who is a super nice guy, is in a sort of a training program to essentially become a partner out there. And then you have the coffee company, which has had a couple of people running it and one person leave, and you've had Candy, which was started by someone, and now Candy is part of coffee. The creamery, I think, is super interesting because the creamery started to just make cream cheese, essentially, and it was made in Manchester, Michigan, with milk from Calder Dairy, which is, I've actually recently went down to the actual Calder Dairy. It was so interesting. And they grew their product lineup, and then there's been a couple of evolutions. And the gentleman who's running the creamery right now actually grew up on a dairy farm in the middle of Michigan, and he had wound up at Zingerman's because they were switching over to organic milk, and they were looking for an outlet for their organic milk. And he got to Plum Market, and then Plum Market introduced him to Zingerman's, and he ended up investing in the creamery and is now on the path to partnership. This is a guy who's a wealth manager in Chicago before he came to Ann Arbor, but he's kind of the new generation of Zingerman's. I think people that have had maybe some outside experience, like you've had people that came to Zingerman's and then grew up in Zingerman's. So Bob Bennett, the chef at the Roadhouse, is a good example of somebody that cooked at the Deli, cooked at the Roadhouse, and then moved up to become the executive chef. But then you've got some people that have totally non-Zingerman's experience that have come in. I also want to talk a little bit about mail order, if we have time to do that, because mail order also has 3 partners, and there's a really strong flavor of the Toyota production system over at mail order. And there are other people in Zingerman's that have Toyota experience. And there's an interesting story about the book about how mail order used to get swamped at Christmas, and then nothing was happening pretty much the rest of the year. And they had to figure out how to introduce what's called lean concepts into mail orders so that they weren't like, Lucy on the chocolate line 1 month a year and then twiddling their thumbs the rest of the time. And they did that by looking at every step of the process and figuring out how many people do we need, how much manufacturing space do we need, and how can we make do pretty much with what we've got, because they had already added another building and they didn't want to add another building. So there's stories all across the company.
So the one you haven't talked about is Ms. Kim's.
Oh, right. So I take a particular pride in Miss Kim, Ji-Hai Kim, who was born in Korea. And she actually read the article I wrote in 2007 about Zingerman's for the New York Times when it was celebrating their 25th anniversary. And she was so intrigued by that she went and got a job at Zingerman's. So I think she cooked at the Roadhouse, she worked at the Deli, cooked at the Roadhouse, then started a food truck. A guy named Mark Hodash used to own Downtown Home and Garden. Hi, Mark, if you're listening. And installed a commercial kitchen in the back and created like a food truck court. The trucks didn't really go anywhere, but they were there every day. And we used to go over and have lunch. And she had one called Sand Street, and Zingerman's invested in the food truck. And then she brought the food over to Carytown, what it used to be called Carytown Bistro, and then was Eve, and is now Miss Kim. And this last year, she was named one of the top rising star chefs in the United States, which I think has been just wonderful for her visibility and for the food there.
I was looking, that's what I was trying to Google. I couldn't remember. It was Food and Wine magazine.
Food and Wine, yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to, I knew that. And it's, the other thing that I think is incredible about these people, all of them, I waitressed at Ms. Kim's last year because she wanted to highlight that you need to pay the people that work for you a decent wage.
Sure.
But everybody, Ali and Paul, the whole team has always done that from the very beginning. Their employees are the most important asset they have. And I think you see that, you see that in everything they do, which is how they now have the training course. They have, I don't know if we call them books or we get the annual, they do so many good things. Do you think that Zingerman's becomes a roadmap or is a roadmap for other restaurants?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. And I interview a number of chefs and owners in the book. So Rick Bayless in Chicago is one of them. Joanne Chang, who owns the Flour Bakery and Cafe Group in Boston. When I lived in Boston, I was in there all the time. They're just wonderful cafes. And then Alon Shaya, who's in New Orleans and Denver. He took a car ride with Ari, and they ended up having a 3-hour talk about philosophy and the way that restaurants should be run. And it was sort of like the sun breaking through the clouds for Alon. There are much smaller places around the country that have come to Zingerman's and maybe take a training class. I interviewed a woman named Kat Gordon in Memphis, and she runs Muddy's Bake Shop. And she took a class in what's called bottom line change, which is how you can make, we were talking about the juicer a little while ago, and that's exactly what bottom line change is. You introduce things that can improve the way you do business, and you see it drop to the bottom line. You're more profitable because of these things. But she also took the class in visioning, and visioning is where you set out a picture of where you might want to be 3 years ahead, 5 years ahead. You're not filling in the details. You're just saying, let's say in 2025, my book about Zingerman's will have been a hardback bestseller, and students in business schools across America are reading the paperback, but to get from today, when the book was just introduced, to 2025, there's going to be a lot of work that goes on, but that is an example of a vision. And Kat Gordon in Memphis during the pandemic, she went to carry out only. She closed 2 of her bakery locations, and then she focused on her main location, and she tore it up and built a classroom in addition to the bakery. And she's now teaching visioning based on the Zingerman's techniques and other classes. And she now sees herself not only as someone running a bakery, but someone teaching philosophy the way it's taught at Zingerman's. I mean, I don't think she's even 40 yet. This is someone that started out just making cupcakes because she thought that was kind of a fun thing to do, and then realized there's so many more layers, no pun intended, to running a successful enterprise. And so she's a wonderful example of how Zingerman's has changed someone's approach to business and enhanced their approach to business.
So I know that we're going to get to people's questions in a few minutes, and I have 3 more things that one's fun and 2 more serious.
Sure.
One, I don't know that I said this to you when I was talking to you, that a lot of people may not realize that right as the pandemic began, Ari and Paul never stopped creating or thinking of new things. Paul took on a new adventure, left Ari back at home here with the rest of the team. Talk about what Paul has started and done in Las Vegas.
So much to my surprise, for me, an establishment like Zingerman's, you could just ride out of town on your horse and feel very satisfied that you had done a good thing. But he always wanted to run that Jewish deli, and he wanted to do it in Vegas. He's just so intrigued by Vegas. He's been going there since he was old enough to gamble. He had an uncle who I think was a numbers runner in Detroit. It's in the book, but I don't think he was convicted. I think they had arrested him, and then they didn't have enough to pin on him. And he operated, I think, out of the Anchor Bar, if I'm remembering the story.
It was.
Yeah. And so Paul wanted to go to Vegas and live the Vegas life, and he's created Saginaw's Deli out there, it's not quite Zingerman's West, but it's Zingerman's ish West, and it's 24 hours, and there's more of an emphasis on breakfast because people are up all night. But there's a larger than life statue of Paul in the lobby, and people can do selfies with it, and he's essentially been out there for the last 2.5 years. And the earliest he told me he would be back is this June, but I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of stayed out there permanently.
He did stay involved. He did Zooms with his team back.
Oh my gosh, they talk all the time. They did Zooms. Some of the Zingerman's people actually went out there to help him with Saginaw's, and he did say that there's a huge difference between doing a deli to kind of college graduates 40 years ago and now being more mature and trying to do this, in this environment. But how interesting to have like a third act. And I think it's kind of fun to see.
Well, so this isn't my next serious question, but you triggered me when we called this one Saginaw. It has the statue of him, or whatever we want to call it. But I did not know this until I read the book. How did Zingerman's get named Zingerman's?
Oh, how did Zingerman's get named Zingerman's? So they were going to call it Greenberg's. They just had a feeling that it needed to sound like a Jewish deli, and they had everything all ready to go and call it Greenberg's. And a week before they opened, it turned out that someone in Lansing had the rights to the name Greenberg's Deli. And they were not, if they had used it, they would have either gotten sued or had to take signs down. So they looked at the alphabet and they thought, we want to be distinctive. And they kind of zeroed in on the Z and said, you know what, most people would name something with an A, let's go with the Z, and literally kind of put the name together. And that was where Zingerman's comes from. Now, the funny thing about that is that every so often someone will come in the deli or the roadhouse and they'll claim to have known the original Mr. Zingerman. And of course, there was no Mr. Zingerman. So they've just outed themselves, as ringers at that point.
So this is my serious question before I ask you the fun question before we go to Q&A. You get serious at the end of the book. Make me a little serious, which I didn't want to be. It's the 40th anniversary this year. There'll be a big celebration at the Deli and the Roadhouse. I'm sure.
Roadhouse is tomorrow night, and then the Deli is on March 15th.
But you say in the book, Ari doesn't have children. Paul's two sons are musicians, don't want to go in. And you talk about the visioning, and you talk about the 2032 visioning. So what do you, you do talk about the potential future for Zingerman. So maybe we should give that serious question before I go to a more fun question.
Sure. So one of the things that's been in the works is, what's going to happen with the succession plan, because to buy out Paul or to buy out Ari is going to cost a lot of money, and it would have to be a person that was they would not sell to anybody who wasn't as dedicated as they are. And I don't think you can replace founders. So their idea is that the managing partners of the businesses will collectively own the enterprise, and either they have to put some money, they might have to put some money in or not. But the idea is to truly make it some kind of a cooperative. And then another idea that's been floating around, and I thought it would be done by the time the book came out, but it's not, is an at-risk kind of investment for the public, not crypto or anything like that, but you would be able to buy a piece of a share of Zingerman's that was at risk, and it would depend on how the company did, the community of businesses did over the course of a period of time. And the understanding would be that it is not guaranteed to give you a return of, X% a year. But what I did find out during the pandemic was that, they were worried about cash flow, and they put some feelers out to different kind of wealth managers and stuff around the business world. And the message came back that if you need a line of credit, we can set one up for you. And I had one gentleman tell me that this is probably $1 billion brand if they ever chose to sell the whole thing, which I don't think they would ever do. But if you think about it, there's a coffee company out in California called Blue Bottle Coffee. And Blue Bottle started with a single coffee cart, and it was sold to one of the big food companies for $700 million. So if Blue Bottle, which just makes coffee, can go for $750 million, I'm sure Zingerman's could go for $1 billion. It's a very valuable brand.
But I'm going to make my own personal comment here. I know these guys, and I have really, I know how difficult these 2 years have been, and how scared they've been, how concerned they've been about their employees, how they kept it, as you say, this pandemic time. And none of them look at Zingerman's that way. These are people who just care about their business.
Yeah. Sure.
But having said that, I talked at the beginning about what my favorite sandwich was. And, another story in there is about how Ari, now he's at the Roadhouse, which is where, although I see him at the farmer's market on Saturdays, used to sit at a table at the Deli. So that's where you knew you could always see him. He would be looking over. And, you got to admit, even when I go to the Deli, don't look like I look right now. I'm in my clothes. And he saw a man in a suit, and knew that this wasn't his normal clientele. And it turned out to be the advance team for President Obama. And Ari knew that President Obama was coming, but was happy he came, but had other commitment. and turned it over to his partners.
Yeah, and I think the reason it was logical for Paul to do it because Paul has been involved in several initiatives for fair benefits and fair wages. He'd been to the White House and had conversations with the White House about that initiative. So, you know, when Barack Obama came out here, it only made sense for Paul to be his host that day. And that really was, it's a really fun story. And the quote from Obama, I think about the Reuben is up on the wall in the dining room in the deli. And I think that was, you can't buy that. I mean, that's just a moment in time that you know, is a real spotlight for Zingerman's.
And Paul really does, they all do, about the fair wages. That's how I became involved. It was actually through them, and became good friends with Jane Fonda and others because of it. But okay, Mickey, you didn't tell us, and I do not believe I read it. What is your favorite sandwich?
So my favorite sandwich is actually a salad. Yeah, I know. So I like the Z-Cobb salad, which is a play on words, and it's like a Cobb salad, but a Zingerman's Cobb salad, and you get everything in there. You get the nice turkey, and you get the cheese, and you get a lovely dressing it reminds me a little bit of a Maurice salad that we ate growing up, you know, going to Hudson's. And one of those salads is so hearty that you could eat it over 2 days. So that's my answer. Yeah.
I like their salads. I love their salads, but I'm like Barack Obama. Give me that Reuben. When I'm down and I'm out, I need the Reuben.
There you go.
John, I'm trying to stick to your timeline. It's 7:48, not 7:45. But do we have Q&A?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions. Did you have one more fun question you want to ask?
Go to the questions.
I mean, I'm curious to know, there's a couple questions here, but you got me thinking
about what to eat.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think everybody's thinking about that. Yeah. But I'm curious to know, for both of you, what your favorite sandwich menu item is. For me personally, like I can talk about the sandwiches, but I'm required when I visit my parents in Wisconsin who grew up in Ann Arbor, or we grew up in Ann Arbor, they moved there later in life. I'm required to bring coffee cake, the sour cream coffee cake home. Like that's just like bread and cheese, yes, but like I am not let in the door without the sour cream coffee cake. So I want to know for both of you what your favorite, non-sandwich item from across all families is. I'm just curious.
Okay, Mickey, you first.
Well, fried chicken at the Roadhouse, pimento cheese. And did you know there's 3 different recipes for the pimento cheese? Because if you go to the Roadhouse, it's called Ari's pimento cheese. And then there's one that's made by the creamery. And then I think there's another one that's served in the deli. Maybe they've standardized it lately. Pimento cheese, the fried chicken. I took a gelato class, which was a lot of fun. And I'm really crazy about the dark chocolate gelato. So love the potato chips, love some of the salads that are at the deli, but I think I'd be very happy eating that fried chicken once a week.
So to show you how unhealthy I continue to be, I mean, I do love the fried chicken and I will get that, but when I went with the governor about all of her kids, and of course the governor got mad at me. She's more of Mickey's, do the salad. I love the brownies without the nuts. Yeah. I do them without nuts. And I always have those because they're what I can eat at 10 o'clock at night and they make me happy. I love the pecan raisin bread.
The raisin pecan.
I always get a loaf of that when I'm there. And then I can eat lots of other things, but I'm a junk food queen. I was glad when they brought the pretzels back. They stopped making bagels.
Yes, they had to interrupt the pretzels for a while.
Yep.
There's a brownie you might like. I don't know if you've had it. It's called the black and white brownie. and it's almost like a 7-layer bar. It's got the coconut
Yep.
on top, and yeah, the nice people out at mail order, I went out to sign some books, and they gave me a little goodie bag, and there's one of those brownies in there, and I had just had my wisdom teeth out, but I still managed over here to enjoy the brownie.
And I will say, unfortunately, I've been losing a lot of them lately, but I will make bets with my colleagues about football games, basketball games, and I've lost a lot of bets, but I always bet a Zingerman box, a Zingerman.
Great. Yeah.
And I'm very popular, and people want to make bets with me because they hope I'm going to lose
Sure.
and they're going to win.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Thank you both. Those are great answers. I was hoping one of you might say the brownies as well. That's also a contender for me. So Thomas, one of our viewers, asks if there are any examples of how Zingerman's adopted Deming's philosophy, which I believe refers to Dr. W. Edwards Deming's theory of management.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of, so Deming has the famous 14 points, and they're summarized in the book. So I want people to have that basis of understanding, but there are a couple of things that Deming teaches, which is one of them is visual management, which is, in other words, lay it out so that people can understand it and follow the process. And so if you go out to Cornman Farms, and we haven't talked about Cornman, but that's the immense farm that they own out in Dexter, they do many, many, many weddings and events. And if they did every single one in a custom way, it would cost the earth and nothing would ever get done. They have something called tiny weddings, and you get 2 hours, and you get a greeting, you get the ceremony, you get a toast, and I think you get cake. And they can do 5 of those in a day, and they have a big board out at Cornman Farms, and it shows the flow with little tickets of this has to be done, this has to be done, this has to be done. So that's directly something that Deming taught and learned in Japan and brought over here. And then another piece of Deming's philosophy is essentially that people should have a voice in the work that they do. So instead of managers telling everybody what to do and not listening if it doesn't work that way, one of his principles was to encourage information to come up to the top. And they definitely follow that at Zingerman's.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Matt writes, Ann Arbor has been one of the few Michigan cities that offer multiple dining options for vegetarians and vegans. I was wondering if Zingerman's was one of the first Ann Arbor businesses to offer a vegetarian section, and if they've added more vegetarian options as the years have gone by.
Well, they've had vegetarian options. It's not part of their core, really. And in fact, that's one of the things I'd like to see them do more of. And I think some of the growers in this area would like to see them do more of. In season, they have absolutely gorgeous vegetables, tomatoes, asparagus, things like that. But off season, I still think they could make a little bit more of an effort for vegetarians and vegans. It's still a real meat and dairy focused place. And having lived in Arizona, for example, people in Arizona are very focused on veganism, vegetarianism. There are entire restaurant groups out there. Sam Fox is an example of a restaurant owner that has taken the focus on health and really built it into the Flower Child franchise. And I think that going forward, I think Zingerman's wants to be more sustainable. And one of the ways you can be more sustainable is dial back the sort of emphasis on cows and dairy. And even if it is grown in a considerate manner, they still consume a lot of food, and then dial up the emphasis on fresh produce. Problem is we're in Michigan. And so it would have to be grown hydroponically, or it would have to be root vegetables, and those can be a little boring after 4 months of root vegetables. But I would say I think that's an area of opportunity for them.
Great, thank you. I think we've made everybody sufficiently very hungry. I know I am. But thank you both so much for your time this evening. It's a real pleasure to be at Downtown Ann Arbor Bookstore talking about another downtown Ann Arbor business. These are the kind of events that we are so grateful to be able to continue to do. So thank you both for your time. Hope to have you both in the store in the not too distant future.
I have a gift card from Christmas that I need.
Oh, great.
To
Yeah, stop on by.
If anyone wants to use a gift card,
yeah, there you go.
they can use it on my book.
And we'll have signed copies in the not too distant future as well. So be sure to stop in for those. But thank you both so much. We hope you continue to be safe and be well. And to all of our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
You.
Bye.